that. The first thing is to remember, very simply, that putting tariffs on a vast array of products is what we call protection. You are protecting the industries inside your country by hampering the competition they face from abroad. Now, let's take the most egregious example of these new tariffs that were implemented this last week against China by the United States. The most extreme example is the electric car and truck, where the tariff, which was already in place at 27.5%, was raised to 100%. Let me explain briefly what that means. Imagine an electric car or truck made in China. I should tell everyone that China is now the world's #1 producer of electric cars and trucks. They have figured out over the last 10 years that people have been competing in various parts of the world to produce a profitable electric vehicle as the way our society is going to replace the horrible pollution of the gas-powered automobile with an electric automobile. Put aside whether that is an adequate climate control response, it isn't, but let's deal just with the tariff question. Okay, the Chinese have done it. They've won that competition, hands down. They produce the highest quality at the lowest price. So the competition has happened. Lots of companies here in the United States have been working on producing electric vehicles and the batteries needed to power them, but the Chinese have won that. Their system, which you can think about, has been able to mobilize their scientific talent, their technology, their corporations, private and public, and they've won the competition. So if the world were going to buy the best, cheapest electric vehicle, we would all be buying Chinese. Much of the world is doing that, including Europe, where the Chinese cars and trucks, you see them on the road, not a problem. But no American sees them. Why? Because the 27.5% tariff means that whatever the Chinese charge for their trucks, electric trucks and cars, you have to pay that price to the Chinese if you were an American, plus 27.5% going to Uncle Sam as the tariff. That prices the Chinese out of the American market. You're going to make this even worse because Americans know and have told our government that the Chinese continue to improve their technology so that they're going to be even cheaper and even better than the Americans, and others competing with them are likely to be for years into the future. That's how far ahead the Chinese have achieved. Okay, so we are now raising it to, if the car costs $20,000 that you're buying from China to pay to the Chinese, you'll have to add another $20,000 and pay $40,000 here in the United States, because you have to pay $20,000 to U.S. government in tariff on top of the $20,000 to China. This effectively protects everybody producing a car here in the United States. If it costs, and just for simple arithmetic, if it costs $35,000 in the United States to produce a roughly similar truck or car, well, then you can sell it at 35. You could sell it at 36, 37, 38, because it would always still be cheaper to buy that car than the $40,000 you'd have to pay for the Chinese. That's why it's called protection. And it is mostly occurring because the losers of a competition don't want to pay the price of having lost the competition. There's no nice way to say this. And nobody should be fooled when the losers of the competition insist that the winner cheated. Yeah, that's what they always say. It's never their fault. It's not they didn't develop the technology. They didn't develop the expertise in batteries. They didn't. No, 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 no. They did everything right. The other side is cheating. Secretary of the Treasury Yellen went to China and invented an entirely new economics. Excess capacity, she said. The Chinese produce huge factories. Of course they do. That's how they achieve their efficiency. It's called economies of scale. It's something we teach economics students in the first year. If you produce a lot of something, you can bring down the cost per unit of what you produce. So you always build in excess capacity. Competitive enterprises do it all the time. It's part of American economic history. She's just counting, Ms. Yellen is, on people not understanding these basics, and so finding this to be some sort of argument as if the Chinese have cheated. No, they didn't. They outdid you. Competition always has winners and losers. Well, the basic answer to your question, which is a good question, is that there is no plan, that this is a process in which political urgency drives endless expansion of the debt. And let me try in a very simple but clear way to explain this. We have a bizarre kind of capitalism in the United States. And by bizarre, I mean it puts our politicians in a very strange and awkward position. On the one hand, corporations want the government to do lots of expensive things for them. They want them to maintain a global military, to protect buying and selling around the world, which the United States does as much or more than any other country on earth. And it wants to protect its ability to get materials, to get them for a good price, and having hundreds and hundreds of military bases around the world, which is very expensive, not to mention the wars, which are even more expensive, is part of the cost of servicing what corporations want. At the same time, those corporations resent and fight against paying taxes, which would be the way the government gets the revenue to then do what the corporations want the government to do. All right, let's take a look then not at the corporations for a moment, but at the mass of working people. They too have things they want and need from the government to do. Everything from Social Security and Medicare to maintaining the roads, to helping finance schools, education, hospitals, and all the rest. And like the corporations, the mass of people don't want to spend the taxes to pay for all of that. So we have corporations and working people, both of whom put demands on the government to do things which cost the government money. And yet, at the same time, the corporations and the mass of people don't want to pay taxes. Last point, the corporations have enormous wealth to get the government to do what they want, and the mass of people do not. That is, nobody has so far organized the mass of people to put together the amount of money that might someday enable them to influence the government. But right now, and for most of the history of capitalism, the division of the income in a society between corporations and the people, and between rich and the mass of people, puts the overwhelming bulk of the wealth in the hands of corporations and the rich. And now what everybody knows who's honest, the corporations and the rich have been very successful in removing the burden of taxation off of themselves and onto the mass of people. This has been going on for the last century. And now here comes the point. After a certain level, the mass of people revolt. They say we will not pay more taxes. They make it impossible for politicians to keep doing what they've been doing, which is shifting the burden. For example, in case people are not familiar, we used to rely on the income tax, which is a progressive tax. The higher your income, the higher the percentage you have to pay. Then, when corporations were strong enough, they got that changed. Half of what the government raises now is money off of Social Security, withholding from the weekly check of an American. That's not a progressive tax. That does not go up in percentage as you get richer. In fact, if you earn more than $160,000 a year, which rich people in this country do, you don't pay on what's above 160,000. Only the average people pay. So look at how successful corporations and the rich have been in shifting the taxes, but they can't anymore. The mass of people won't allow it. They vote out anybody who raises their taxes. Okay, now the politicians are in a jam. The corporations and the people demand services, but they can't squeeze more taxes out of the masses, and the corporations and the rich have basically bribed their way out of paying much in the way of taxes. So what is the government going to do? What do the politicians do? Answer: they borrow money. The way they keep spending on the corporations and on the people is not by taxing, but by borrowing the money. And that's why the borrowing is getting bigger and bigger, and all the national debt is the accumulation of annual deficits over the years, and they're going crazy now because the government, desperate to hold on to political power, is spending money like there's no going out of style. It's not relevant because in the end, the government has to raise the money to pay the interest on this enormous debt. And that means more and more of the money you and I pay in taxes in the United States is not going to give us a useful service. It's going to pay off whoever lent money to the government. And here's the last step. The fundamental injustice of the national debt is often overlooked. Who lends money to the United States government? But the minute you understand this, you will see it's rich people and corporations, and to some extent, foreign corporations and foreign governments. The mass of people are not in a position, they don't have any extra money to lend to the government, so they don't. The mass of people pay the taxes that are used to pay the interest to corporations and the rich who are in a position to lend to the government. If you see that, here comes the punchline of punchlines. You will understand that when the politicians borrow money, they are doing an enormous service to corporations and the rich, because they're basically saying to them, we will not tax you. Instead, you shall take the money that we could have taken from you in taxes, and instead we will borrow it from you. And after a few years, we'll give it back to you. And during that time, we'll pay you interest on the money that we've borrowed from you. So for corporations, this is a no-brainer. Of course, it's better to have the government borrow from you than to tax you as corporations and the rich. So that's why they tolerate it. And that's why the mass of people, even if they don't understand the economics, understand they're being ripped off. And the deficit is a mechanism for ripping off the mass of people who pay the cost of it, whereas the benefit goes to the corporations and the rich, who are the only ones to be able to lend to the government. One last point. Foreign governments are also able to lend money to the United States government. And most of the people watching this program probably don't know that the two largest lenders to the United States government are Japan and the People's Republic of China, ranking 1 and 2 among foreign lenders. China has somewhere around $800 billion lent to the United States government. That is money that the Chinese lend to the United States government, which the United States government can and does use in part to fight a war in Ukraine where China is helping the Russians. If that sounds like a strange arrangement, welcome to modern capitalism. This might strike you as even stranger. With $800 billion of US debt, the United States has to tax all of us, which it does, to raise the money, which it then sends to Beijing in interest on all the debt that the Chinese own of the United States government, which means that part of the money China uses to build up its military is the money we American taxpayers deliver to them. It's the way capitalism has organized the world, and it's not the least of the absurd contradictions that this system is living with and imposing on all of us. The BRICS, for everybody who doesn't know, China and its allies. The world economy is now split in a way it hasn't been for 75 years. The world is now split in a way it hasn't been for 75 years. For most of the last 75 years, the dominant economic bloc in the world was the United States and its allies. These days, this is called the G7. The United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. Those 7 countries were the dominant reality of the world economy. That is no longer true. There is now a second block of countries, namely China and its allies. They are called the BRICS because the first 5 that got together, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and a half dozen more that have joined since. To give you an idea, as of 2023, last year, the total GDP, the total output per year of goods and services in the G7 was around 29% of the total output of the world. If you look at the BRICS, their output, all of it, was about 33%. In other words, as a bloc, the BRICS are already a bigger economic unit than the G7. That is a momentous change, and it's a gap getting bigger with each passing year. They were roughly equal in 2020. They're already significantly far apart in 2023. It's going very fast. The United States is in a declining position in the world economy. It has been, but now it's being felt. You could pretend it wasn't there. You could deny it. There are plenty of people who do that still. But it's getting harder and harder as these tariffs and sanctions all show. That's the most important thing to understand. Every country in the world, and I want to underline every, is rethinking its entire foreign economic policy to take account of the fact that there are now 2 power blocks. If you need to improve your exports or your imports or get a loan or get investment, you don't just go to London or Paris or New York. You can now go to New Delhi, or you can go to Beijing, or it's a whole new world. And your political alliances, look at the departure of Americans from Niger in Africa and being replaced by Russian troops. These are all signs. You'd have to be really blind or desperate not to see all that's going on. Look at the miscalculation in Ukraine. My God, the West thought it was fighting a war with an isolated Russia. Wrong. Russia could turn and did turn to China and India and Brazil and got enormous amounts of help, meaning that the West misunderstood, which is why the West has had to escalate the fight and is still losing as a result. I mean, you're making colossal mistakes because you don't want to face how the world economy has changed and what that really means. Last point. There are many studies, many books, articles about sanctions, like the one you mentioned. If anybody trades with Iran, well, then, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is lovely. You know what this means? Very little. Countries that were trading with Iran will now make an arrangement. They will make an understanding with some third country. We're going to ship what we used to ship to Iran to you. You have a relationship with Iran that is different from ours. You are too important for the United States to bother with, so we'll work through you. It's a little extra cash to pay for the extra expenses, a little more record keeping, but sanctions are evaded. That is the history of sanctions. The more you put them down, the more the people you put them on figure out ways around it. It's a little bit like tax law in the United States. Every year, Congress rewrites the taxes, and every year, people who used to be in Congress are now private accountants, and they advise their rich clients how to get around the latest. And then the government adjusts the law, and the people who evade the law adjust the evasions. And this silliness is good for headlines, but doesn't change the basic situation. Russia did not stop doing in Ukraine what it's doing because you hit them with the mother of all sanctions. Iran didn't change its government. Last month, over the last month, Secretary of the Treasury Yellen and the Secretary of State Blinken went to China, urging them to change their system. The Chinese must look at them and say, over the last 25 years, we have grown our economy 2 to 3 times faster than yours, year in and year out. That's why you're here visiting us. We are the greatest escape from poverty the world has ever seen. Over 1 billion people escaping poverty in a generation. It's unheard of. Nobody in their right mind would come here urging us to change a system that has worked this well. You can't. What are you doing? It's ridiculous. And you know, most of the world looks at it that way. Only here in the United States does it seem reasonable for the United States to go to China after 25 years of doing less well, giving them advice on making their system look more like ours. Here's what I think is going on. And of course, you know, the future is always a guess, your guess, my guess, and I don't claim any more than that. But here's my guess. I see, particularly again, the younger generations asking questions about the economic system much bolder, much deeper than I have ever seen before. And certainly that was true of my generation when I was a university student. And so I've asked myself, where is this going? And the answer I've come up with is the following. These young people are not going to be persuaded that voting for a Democrat versus a Republican, or for that matter, vice versa, that's not the solution. They understand the problems are deeper and that these people are fundamentally puppets of the way the system is laid out. You know, a couple of days ago, the Washington Post carried an article which I found remarkable. Someone had given them the transcript of a WhatsApp conversation, and it was a conversation among very rich corporate people discussing how much money they were going to give and what kind of support they were going to give to the mayor of New York, Adams, to have the police in New York intervene at Columbia, at NYU, to squash the protesters around the Gaza activity. Okay? There it is. The young people know this. They didn't know those details, those are new, but it confirms what people have begun to understand, that if you live in a system that produces great wealth at one end and mass of people having a kind of hard time getting through, you're going to literally create in those people the use of the money that has been concentrated in their hands to do whatever they want. So if, for example, these people are very supportive of Israel, in this case, that was the case, they want to shut down these protests that support Palestinians and Gaza and all that. So they offer money, and they are listened to. The mayor answers the phone. These are important donors. They talk about donating more to him so he can be reelected. The money is doing what it's doing. It's showing the young people, and they've learned it, that we have the best government money can buy. But that's not the government they want. And they're now smart enough to understand the problem really isn't in the government. The government is acting out what an unequal society will make it do. And that has always been true, and therefore you got to deal with that. Well, how do you deal with the horrible inequality that allows a few people to shape what a mayor of the biggest city in the country does over the telephone against young people who are peacefully protesting in the university where they are students? Well, the young people are asking basic questions. So now I'll tell you why that's the answer to your question. They understand that the origin of the inequality is inside the enterprise. It's inside the factory, the office, the store. And it comes out of the way those are organized. Because in all of them, factories, offices, and stores, a tiny group of people, the owner of the business, the board of directors, if it's a corporation, they have all the power. They make the decision what is going to be produced, what technology is going to be used, where the production will occur. And then the big one, how to utilize, what to do with the revenue you get from running the business. All of that's decided. A board of directors in an American corporation is usually between 10 and 20 people. They may hire 10,000, but it's 10 and 20 individuals who sit around. They usually meet 4 times a year, and they make those decisions. And guess what? They give the money, the revenue, the debt, the profit, whatever you want to call it, they give it to the shareholders, who are the ones who elect them to be on the board, or to the top executives, which often includes themselves. In other words, the people at the top take the lion's share of the net revenue of the enterprise, which should surprise nobody. They're the people who run it. They're in a position to do it, and they do it. Boeing Aircraft, who has had one safety disaster after another for the last several years, just raised the annual pay of their departing CEO, Mr. Calhoun, from the 22 million he got last year, in 2022, to 33 million for 2023. He presided over the worst safety record any modern airline has ever achieved. Okay, there's no connection between what he did and what he's paid. And the board of directors voted him that money. It was not just him. That's how they take care of themselves. So here's where we're going. I think 5 or 10 years from now, this generation will have put on the agenda a radical change in the organization of the enterprise, the factory, the office, and the store. It's going to be called, I suspect, the democratization of the enterprise. All enterprises are going to be run one person, one vote, as a democratic community. No individual is going to get hundreds of millions. No Bill Gates, no Elon Musk, none of that. You can give a reward to people who make a good invention. You can honor the one who improves the technology and give them money too, sure. But basically, we are not going to function to produce this kind of inequality. And that's going to save us from rich people who buy the government, when none of us are going to be in a position to do that. And I think that's the kind of fundamental change we're talking about. So it'll be on a scale of deciding, for example, no longer to organize our factories, offices, and stores with masters and slaves, as in slavery, or with lords and serfs, as in feudalism, or within of being taxed, the government comes, takes your money, like happens to you and me. No, instead, the government doesn't tax you and instead comes a little later and borrows the money from you, promising to pay it back in a year or 2 or 5, and paying you interest in the meanwhile every year. But now we've reached so bad a point in our economy, in our capitalism gone screwy, that the rich people are now not as willing as they used to be to play this game, to lend money to the over-borrowing federal government. That's why the credit agencies, Standard & Poor, Moody's, and Fitch's, have lowered the credit rating of the United States below AAA, what some other countries get. It's not as safe to lend to the United States. Why? Because it has borrowed so much. And why is that? Because corporations and the rich use their politicians, the ones they donate to and own, to make sure they don't have to pay. And they're happy to borrow, but not so happy now because the government is so deeply in debt that they don't want to lend the way they used to. Now the government is stuck. What is it going to do? And the answer is it's going to find people that the Republican Party doesn't like. People have to understand, why did so many American companies, including all the biggest ones, move so much of their production out of the United States over the last 40 years? Remember, what Mr. Trump says he wants to do is bring them back, reshore them, various words. Well, okay, then let's go back. Why did they go? Why is it a problem? And the answer is very simple. The wages over there are much lower than the wages you have to pay Americans. Everybody knows that. What you may not know, although you should, is that China is a much bigger market than the United States because it has 4 times the number of people and it isn't a terribly poor country anymore. So in short, the reasons corporations went were 2: lower wages and a bigger, faster growing market. If you go to a business school and you take a course, I teach those courses. You teach young entrepreneurs, you want to do well in your business, go to where the wages are low and the market is growing. That's the rule. So they went. That hasn't changed. China continues to grow 2 to 3 times faster than the United States. It's been doing that for 25 years. There's no end of that in sight. None. So you're going to tell companies, oh, we're going to hit you with a tariff, and they're going to say, yeah, I'm going to go back to where the wages are much higher and the market is growing slowly. You know what that is? A recipe for disaster. They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. The first thing they'll do if these tariffs stick is they'll leave China and they'll go to another country nearby. That they might do. But they, of course, would be worried that he'll then put a tariff on whatever country they go to. And we're going to have a kind of a tit for tat kind of maneuvering around here. But they can't come back. It's not feasible. Or let me put it to you in a more scary way. Maybe Mr. Trump's long term is he knows what I'm saying, or his advisors do. So he knows the tariff is only the beginning. He's got to make it worthwhile. He can't control the market. The Chinese have him on that. But he can control the wages, maybe. Maybe he can drive down the wage level of the United States so it becomes competitive with the rest of the world. Let me say that in real English. Crush the American working class. Make the middle class a memory receding in the rearview mirror, something your grandparents will tell you about, but you're not going to have a steady job, and you're not going to have a decent income. And of course, you're not going to have children. And of course, you're not going to get married. You're going to scramble around, piece together a few gigs here and there, and hope that you can get by, like a lot of people in poor countries already know. Maybe that's the future. And if it is, man, the American people better stop it now before it gets some momentum. Just some facts that you'll never hear from the government. The federal government employs about 5 million people, half of them in the civilian and half of them in our military. So that makes about 2.5 million people that are civilian. Those are the ones that are being fired by Mr. Musk's chainsaw program. Okay? And the argument is this has something to do with efficiency. That's complete nonsense, and I will show you how and why. 2.5 million people work for the federal government. If you're interested in governmental efficiency, let's remember we have 3 levels of government in America: federal, state, and local. Civilian employees of the federal government, 2.5 million. Civilian employees of the 50 state governments, 5 million. Civilian employments of the cities and towns of America, local government, 15 million. If you really wanted to do something about government efficiency, you would go after the 20 million state and local public servants, not the 2.5 million at the federal level. What fakery you're doing. Number 2, statistics. Real simple. If you go back to the 1960s and you ask the question, how many civilian employees did the federal government of the United States have in the 1960s? I'll give you the answer because I've done the work. 2.5 million. Let me do that again. 2.5 million. And how many today? 2.5 million. Guess what? The population of the United States is 100 million more people today than it was in the 1960s. We have the same number of federal employees providing services to a population 100 million larger than they used to. You know what economists call it when the same number of people provide service to a much larger customer base? That's called efficiency, jackass. If you wanted to celebrate the federal government, you would, and you would say, wow, what an achievement that you have been able to hold on to 2.5 million, not expand while the population grew. This is a fake game. This is like when they used to say, every time they savaged their workforce, we're reforming our business model. Oh, stop. You're not reforming anything. You're firing people because you got a new piece of machinery or whatever happened. Stop it. At least be honest when you do this. This is all a game. The whole purpose of it is Mr. Trump wants to show a dramatic result that he doesn't have to borrow trillions of dollars, which recent U.S. governments have had to do. Why? Because he's saving a lot of money. There aren't many places where he can do it, and this is a place where he can do it as long as he surrounds it with lots of theater, lots of make-believe, lots of, smoke and mirrors and all the rest of it, efficiency. Look, let me try to give you a little bit more of a context. Throughout the year 2024, I can't tell you the number of times I did either interviews or gave talks or something in which I said that the American people are being insulted on a daily basis. The Democratic Party, because they had the president, Mr. Biden, needed to say over and over again that the economy was doing great. And they did. They cherry pick. Look, let me back up. An economy is a very complicated thing. It's like the human body. It's a very complicated thing. And if you go to a doctor and you say, I'm really feeling not so good, what's the matter with me? Suppose what the doctor did is he took a thermometer, stuck it in your mouth, waited 2 seconds, 2 minutes or whatever, said, 98.6 or whatever it's supposed to be, you're fine, go home. Hopefully you would be smart enough to know you need a different doctor because this is incompetent. The medical profession has developed ways to look at your blood, at your urine, at your body's temperatures, but also many, CAT scan and MRI, all of that. A battery of tests because you're a complicated thing, you and your body. Well, the economy is the same. You can, if you pick only the thermometer, the person's fine. You do an MRI and you have to tell them they got 3 weeks to live. And everything in between. So what the government was doing was looking at a low unemployment number, which itself was questionable in the way you just showed, but it also looked at the stock market. The richest 10% of our people own 80% of the stocks. So to look at the stock market tells you about the 10%, but not about the 90% who don't have stocks of any significance. So once you then started looking at what would be the equivalent of a comprehensive diagnosis of the economy, then it turned out that the mass of people were looking at something else, like the food budget of the family, or the eggs per dozen, or the rent they have to pay. When you started focusing on where people were, then there was no mystery. For them, it really is bad. And that's why I said a few minutes ago, the really big picture is you're watching the decline of an empire with the people who have the money and the political position to hold on to theirs are doing it. If I could analyze the American election, that's why Mr. Trump won. The unspoken message, I'll protect you. Give me your money, the rest of it may go. That's why he said the other day, to everybody's consternation, I don't care if the car prices go up. What? What are you talking? This is a society depends on the car. That's how people get from their home to where they buy the food with a car. They get from their home to where they have a job with a car. It's not a rational way of doing it, but it is the way we do it in this country. Car, 16-year-olds like me, eager to get their hands on the car that will make them free. We're a car. You jack up the price suddenly of cars. You think it doesn't matter. I don't care. Wow. You're not thinking. You're not watching. You have no grasp on what it is you're doing, let alone what its consequences are. I think the conservatives will not get it when the prices go up. They will buy into some malarkey about either it doesn't matter or it's temporary. Mr. Navarro said that before the cameras yesterday or the day before. Temporary. The last time the Federal Reserve said that an inflationary spike was temporary was before the last one, and they apologized for a year after about how wrong they were to think it was temporary. All right? It's just empty. What will get the conservatives is when those people that are now disappointed begin to act, begin to express in many different ways their upset about what's going on. Then it'll dawn on the conservatives that maybe betting on the Trump horse wasn't the right one to bet on.